Everybody, welcome to another crochet tutorial with me, Laura, and in this video I will be finally sharing my Tunisian crochet and normal crochet socks. And these are fully customizable, so these should fit any size, hopefully a foot, so for most sizes anyway. But we're going to be using two different sized hooks for this tutorial. Now you can use any hook for this project, you can use any yarn for this project, so it's like fully flexible. But just for the record, I'm using a DK light worsted weight yarn, and with that I'm using a 3mm normal crochet hook, and I'm also using slightly bigger a 4mm Tunisian crochet hook. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, so let's bring in my terrible foot drawing, and this is going to help us learn how to make this sock. So the first part we're going to be crocheting is this part, and you can use any stitch that you like for this, but what we want to do is we want to focus on the size around this part of the foot, so basically where a normal sock would end. So you imagine your sock here, and we're going to do some ribbing around here. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to do a foundation stitch that fits all the way around, completely around your ankle part of your foot. So for me, I did the camel stitch here, and we actually worked it long ways like this. So I'm going to show you, and I recommend for this tutorial using two different sized hooks. Now we've got a normal crochet hook, and this is a 3mm, so it's going to be smaller than my Tunisian crochet hook, which is one of these long ones that looks like a knitting needle, and this one's bigger at 4mm. Okay, but I kind of want to avoid specifying hook sizes and yarn weights, because this tutorial is about using the yarn in your stash, using the hook sizes that work with that yarn, and just making this completely customizable for whatever you have in your stash and whatever size foot you have. But I do recommend using, for the beginning bit, this bit here, a smaller hook size than for the Tunisian crochet. Okay, so it's going to be normal crochet. So I'm going to take my yarn, and just for reference, this is a DK light worsted weight yarn, but like I said, use any yarn that you like with the hooks that you're using. And we're going to work a foundation stitch to begin. It's going to be a half double crochet foundation stitch. So the first thing we're going to do is a slip knot. And this pattern is in US terminology, and the free written version will be on my website at happyberry.co.uk if you want to go check that out. So the first thing we're going to do, if you don't know the foundation stitch, I do have a tutorial in more detail on this, but so I'm going to try and go slow enough, but we're going to chain 2 to begin. Okay, chain 2, and then we're going to yarn over, because we're doing a half double crochet or half trebles in UK terms, and we're going to put our hook into the first chain like this. We're going to bring the yarn through the first chain, and normally when we work a normal half double crochet, we would just yarn over and pull through all 3, but because it's a foundation half double crochet, we're going to make a little chain at the end first. So we're going to yarn over and just chain 1, so just pull through the first loop only. And we still have the 3 loops, so then we do our half double crochet, we yarn over, pull through all 3. And that's it, that's a half double crochet foundation stitch. And then the next one, rather than working into that first chain, I'm going to yarn over and we're going to go into that chain that we created at the beginning. So we're just going to put our hook into that little chain 1 we created on the left hand side instead, like that, and do the same thing again. We'll bring the yarn through that chain 1, bring up a little bit of loop, keep it loose, and do the same thing again. We're going to yarn over, create our next foundation chain, then yarn over, pull through all 3 for our half double crochet, and just repeat that until we have the length of your cuff, basically. So this time we're going to go into that second foundation chain, bring the yarn through, again make our next foundation chain, and then our half double crochet, pull through all 3, and so on and so forth. Okay, so just going to repeat that until we have the length of our cuff. Okay, whoops, I only want to go for the first loop only. Pull through all 3. Okay, so I have the height of my cuff. I've actually done 10 half double crochet foundation stitches. So this, if we come back to my terrible drawing, this is the height of ribbing cuff area here. So this is what we've got, and we're going to work in this direction or this direction around our ankle. So we're just going to work the camel stitch until we have the right size. So to do the camel stitch, we're just going to do a little chain 1 and turn, yarn over, and for the first row, normally we work under 2 loops like this. We're actually going to completely avoid those 2 loops, and we're going to find, because this is a half double crochet, we have what looks like a V on the side as well. So we've got like a V on the top that's kind of going in this direction, and then on the side you can see a V in the opposite direction, and that very bottom loop is what I call the side loop. Is we're going to go under that instead, and when we do that, the V at the top gets pushed forward, and that's what creates the knitting stitch effect. So we're going to bring the yarn under that side stitch and then pull through all 3 to do a normal half double crochet. I'm going to do that all the way along. So the next one, we find the next side stitch, so not the normal stitch at the top, but this side stitch here. And I have done a video in more detail on this stitch, so if you want something a little bit slower and in more detail, I'll put a link to that in the description below. But we're going to work 1 half double crochet in each little side stitch to the end, making sure we've still got our stitch count of 10. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 and 10. But you don't have to do the camel stitch. You can literally do any stitch that you want for this part of the sock. Okay, so it doesn't have to be this stitch. If you just want to work normal half double crochets, you can do that if you want to. For the next row, what we're going to do is we're going to chain 1 and turn. Instead of working under the side stitch, we're actually going to work in the back stitch. So ignoring your side stitch, we would normally work into a stitch like this, but instead of working in under both loops here, we're going to work under just the back one only. So yarn over first and go down the middle of that top V and grab the loop at the back. So the back loop only, and then work your half double crochet in there. And then what that does is it pushes the front loop and the side stitch to the front along with this knit stitch here, and that creates another knitted stitch effect. So we're going to do that all the way across. So again, find the next back loop only and work a half double crochet in there, and we're going to do that all the way across. 1 half double crochet or half treble in UK terms in each back loop to the end, making sure we've still got a stitch count of 10 obviously. And once you get to the end, we would then repeat those 2 rows until we have the length of ribbing that we want. So for the next row, we go back to the side stitch. So we chain 1, turn, yarn over, and then find the side stitch, the side loop here, and that pushes those top 2 loops to the front. We would repeat that row again. So 1 half double crochet in each side loop to the end, keeping a stitch count of 10 or however many you want. Maybe you want a longer cuff, one that you can fold over, which is nice, so you can make it as shorter as long as you like, completely up to you. And after your side loop row, we chain 1, turn, and then we go back to the back loop only row, So we skip the side loop, find the top 2 loops, the normal loops we normally work under in normal crochet, but back loop only 1 half double crochet in each back loop across. Okay, so you just repeat those 2 rows, side loops and back loops, until you have enough length to go around your ankles. So you want to measure this. If you're making this for somebody else, I highly recommend getting their measurements. And the measurements you'll want to get is, if we go back to my drawing, is obviously the circumference of their ankle. That will be the first measurement that you want to get. And the next measurement is going to be from here to here. Then you want a measurement of the toes. And I think that's it. So I'll correct that if that's different at the end. So they're pretty much the only measurements you need, roughly. Now, obviously, this is not going to fit every single type of foot, but especially with my broken foot, it's all protruding in the wrong directions. So, but this should be designed for most normal shaped feet. So hopefully this will work. But just keep repeating those 2 rows until you have the length of your circumference around your ankle. Okay, so I shall do that and then I shall come back for stage 2. Okay, so I'm just coming up to my last row, and the most important thing is to make sure you end on a back loop row. So you want to end in this direction, and the reason for that is because we're going to pick up stitches along here with Tunisian crochet, and we want to make sure the ribbing's on the right side, so on the outside of our sock, obviously. So I'm just coming up to the end, just the last 2 back loops. Now this is the measurement around the diameter of my ankle. So wrap around like this to make the cuff. And of course you may have more or less rows than I have, but just for reference, I'm a UK size 7, if that means anything to you, and I have actually done, so around my ankle, this is 48 rows, but of course you might have more or you might have less, so it's completely up to you, and it's irrelevant how many rows you have. You just need to make sure you end in this direction. So because what we're going to do now is we're going to drop our normal crochet hook and we're going to grab our Tunisian crochet hook. Now, like I mentioned before, we're going to be using a larger size than the normal crochet hook. So I was using a 3mm with this DK weight yarn, and now I'm upgrading to a 4mm. The reason for that is just because Tunisian crochet can tend to be a little bit tighter. It really does depend on your tension, obviously, but I find just using a smaller crochet hook for the ribbing just helps. So, and what we're going to do now though is we're going to pick up some stitches all the way along this edge. Now each row, you can tell the rows because you've got the little knit stitches here, and that counts for 1 row. So that really helps when you want to count how many rows you've got. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. We're going to pick up 1 stitch per row. So I should end up with 48 stitches, maybe 49 stitches, and the stitch count does not matter. You just need to make sure that they are even. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to find a little bit of space here, somewhere to just pick up as neatly as you can. Just go into some stitches and just pick up a stitch like so. And that's going to be the first stitch for this row. I'm not really going to count the loop on there as my first stitch. This will be my first stitch for this first row. Then this second row here, I'm going to find a little bit of space in there as neatly as I can. So we're just going to put a hook into there, and we're going to bring up a loop there as well. Then I'm going to find my next row here, which should be a little bit easier actually to find a little bit of a gap, and bring up a stitch there. And I'm just going to continue that all the way across, working 1 stitch per row. So by the time I get to the end, I've got 48 rows. So I should end up with picking up 48 stitches, but I'll have 49 stitches because I'm going to have that little extra one at the very beginning. So, and it doesn't matter if you have a odd amount of stitches or an even amount of stitches, really doesn't matter, because this Tunisian crochet stitch we're going to use can have any stitch count, so that's useful. Okay, so I'm going to do that, pick up all these stitches and then come back. Okay, so I'm just coming up to the end and picked up all these stitches here, and I'm not going to bother counting my stitches because stitch count's irrelevant. We just need to make sure that there's nothing being pulled too close together or by, you know, creating too long a gap in between our picked up stitches or adding too many. We just want it to sit nice and perfect like this. Okay, so now we're going to look at measurement number 2. So we have our first measurement, which is around our ankle, and then measurement number 2 is going to be from here down to here. So it's going to be basically at the top of our ankle here. Okay, so this is our next measurement. So what we want to do is we just want to work this Tunisian crochet stitch we're going to do now up to this point of your foot, wherever that may be. So on my previous example, it's about this much here, so just up to here, and we're going to be doing that all the way across this piece. So we've picked up our stitches, and what we're going to do first is a normal reverse row for Tunisian crochet. So if you're brand new to Tunisian crochet, then I do recommend checking out my Tunisian crochet playlist of stitches so you can get used to some of these stitches in more detail. But what we're going to do whenever we do a reverse row, we always have to do a chain 1, pull for the first loop only, and then we always yarn over and pull through 2 until we get to the end. So yarn over through 2, pull through 2, because in this pattern, in this sock pattern, we're going to be using the simple Tunisian crochet stitch, we're going to be using the purl Tunisian crochet stitch, and we're going to be using the knit stitch as well. So we're using all 3 of the basic Tunisian crochet stitches. So if you want to go practice those and come back, that'll be great. Okay, so just pull through 2 until you get to the end. Okay, so I'm just coming up to the end, pull through 2, pull through 2, pull through 2. Okay, so when you get back to the beginning, what we're going to do now, you should end up with having these tiny little vertical bars along here, and this is what we're going to be working around for our Tunisian crochet stitch. So in Tunisian crochet, we always ignore this first vertical bar unless we're increasing. So what we're going to do is we're going to find that second vertical bar here, and we're going to start off with a purl stitch. You can start off with a simple stitch as well, but I find that it's starting off with a purl stitch just gets us into the more difficult stitches straight away. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring the yarn down to do a purl stitch, and then we're going to put our hook underneath that vertical bar. Okay, like so. And then we're going to bring the yarn up and we're going to yarn over. And what I like to do is I just hold this little loop here with my thumb, yarn over, and we're going to bring that yarn under that vertical bar. Okay, then we let go and then just pull to get a really nice purl stitch. And if you can see there, we've got a tiny little loop there, like in knitting, a little purl stitch. Okay, then we're going to do a simple stitch. So we're going to alternate between purl stitches and simple stitches. And so this could be a little bit tedious working this design. So if you just want to work normal simple stitches, the whole pattern, you can do. It's entirely up to you. So, but for a simple stitch, we just keep the yarn at the top. We go under the vertical bar, the next vertical bar, and we grab the yarn from the top and bring that underneath. And that's just a simple stitch. So that's much, much quicker. But we're going to alternate with the simple stitches and the purl stitches. So for the next one, it's a purl stitch. So we're going to bring the yarn down. Just going to hold it with my thumb. Going to go under the next vertical bar, grab the yarn and bring that underneath, and then just pull like that. Then we go back to a simple stitch and then back to a purl stitch. And when you get used to it, alternating between the stitches actually is much easier. So this comes with practice. But if it's too tedious, too complicated for you, just work the simple stitch if you want to. So I'm going to do that all the way across, alternating between purl stitches and simple stitches, and then I shall come back. Okay, so I'm just coming up to the end, and it really doesn't matter if you end on a purl stitch or a simple stitch. And to find the very last, so sometimes it can get confusing where to find the very last vertical bar. So just line up your project with your crochet hook, and then you should clearly see where that last little vertical bar is. And we're just going to grab that. Okay, so it doesn't matter, like I said, if it ends on a purl stitch or a simple stitch. And by the way, we're working the honeycomb stitch. And what we're going to do now is a reverse row, and all reverse rows are exactly the same. We do our little chain 1 at the beginning, so we just pull through the first loop only. Okay, it's very important, that's the only difference. Then we yarn over and pull through 2 until we get to the end. So pull through 2, pull through 2, all the way back to the beginning. Okay. Okay, so just coming back to the beginning. Pull through 2, pull through 2, pull through 2, until we've just got one loop left on our hook. And again, we've created, with that reverse row, we now have a new set of vertical bars at the top here. But if we look slightly below those, we can see we have tiny little purl stitches there, and our simple stitches will look long. So the purl stitches will have this little horizontal bar, and simple stitches will just look normal. So what we're going to do now for the next row is we're going to alternate. So we're going to do the opposite of what we did. And it's quite easy to remember which stitch to do for which row, because if we remember last time we did a purl stitch, so we have this tiny little horizontal bar here, so we know to do a simple stitch instead. So we're going to obviously skip the first vertical bar, find that it'll be smaller than the other ones. Going to go under that vertical bar, and we're just going to do a normal simple stitch. Okay, and this one that looks more normal, we're going to bring the yarn down and do a purl stitch. So again, just hold it with your thumb and put your hook under that vertical bar, grab the yarn, let go, and then just pull your tension. Okay, and then the next one, which looks smaller because it's a purl stitch, we do the opposite and work a simple stitch, which is hard to do on camera. There we go. Get your hook under there, and then the yarn's at the top. Just bring the yarn under for a simple stitch. So we're going to alternate doing the opposite of what we did last time for this second row. Then basically that's our pattern. We're just going to alternate between these two rows to create the honeycomb stitch. Okay. So this is a purl stitch, so I know to do a simple stitch. And then this was a simple stitch, so I bring the yarn down to do a purl stitch. So we're just working the opposite. And we just do that for every row. Okay, so just coming up to the end. So that's a simple stitch, so I know to do a purl stitch. And then tiny little simple purl stitch there, so I know to do a simple stitch. And then we're going to end on a purl stitch, so bring the yarn down. Again, just line up your project so you can see where that vertical bar is. And then just bring the yarn through to do a little purl stitch. Okay, so you can start to see our honeycomb stitch coming together. And now we just do a reverse row, which is all the same as the last ones. We just do a chain 1 to begin. And then we yarn over, pull through 2 until we get to the end. 2, back to the beginning. Okay, nearly back at the beginning. And then for the next row, we go back to the first row that we did. So we're going to alternate back with starting with a purl stitch instead. And if you put your project down and you forget which stitch to do next, you just need to look at your stitches, and you can see there that that's a nice long vertical bar. So we know that that was a simple stitch. We know to do the opposite and bring the yarn down and do a purl stitch. So sometimes it's a good idea just to hook that yarn out the way so you can see your vertical bar like so. And then we can see that the next one is very, very small, so we know that that was a purl stitch, so we know to do a simple stitch. So we're always working the opposite. And this one is a little bit tight, so to get my hook under there and work a simple stitch. And there we go. And we're just going to repeat those 2 rows, just like we were repeating these alternating rows. We're going to alternate these 2 rows until we have the length that we need, which is going to be the distance from here, the end of our cuff, up to the top of your foot. So you just want to keep working those 2 rows until you get to this point on your foot, okay? So I'm going to do that, and then I shall come back and show you the next step. So we're just working this part here, because you can see here, you keep alternating between the simple stitches and the purl stitches, you end up with this beautiful honeycomb stitch, like so. So for mine, it was probably about, I don't know how many rows I did, I could probably count, but I like to measure, so it's probably about 3 inches, something like that. So, but yours might be different, longer or shorter, but I will do that, and then I'll come back and show you what to do next, okay? Okay, so I have repeated those 2 rows, and you can really start to see the honeycomb stitch come together, and you can see also as well why we've swapped to a larger hook size compared to the beginning, because this tends to be a little bit tighter than this. And don't worry if it's curling, that we will sort that out later, obviously when we make the sock, and also a little bit of blocking if you really want to settle it down. What we're going to do now is a little bit of maths, but you don't need to do the maths if you don't want to. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start crocheting. We're going to obviously do a reverse row, and then we're going to slip stitch up to the middle. And we want to create a piece of fabric. If I bring in my piece of paper, we want to create, so this is our beginning, get my hook out of the way. This is our beginning bit, this is our ribbing. Okay, and this is the bit of Tunisian crochet we've done. Now we're going to create some Tunisian crochet just in this area here. So what we want to do ideally, you can just do it by eye if you want to, just to make a note of your stitch count. But what I like to do is a little bit of maths, and so my stitch count is 49. So you may have an odd number or an even number. So we're just going to make this a little bit easier and turn that into 48, okay? And then we're going to divide that in half, divide that by 2, okay? And so that becomes 24, okay? So this stitch count here, I'm going to make 24 stitches, okay? And this will also add up to 24 plus the extra 1, okay, that we dropped here. But we also want to know how far to slip stitch over to this part. It's a good idea to divide this into, which becomes 12. So we're going to make that 12 stitches over, and then that's going to leave us at 13 stitches here because we've got that extra 1 there. So hopefully that makes sense for you, and you can do the same to work out where to start. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to do my reverse row, same as always, and then we're going to slip stitch over those 12 stitches. So let me just do my last reverse row, pull through 2 till we get to the end. Okay, so I am back at the beginning, and it looks like this. So what we're going to do though is we're going to, like I said, we're going to slip stitch over 12 stitches to begin, and it's the same as before. We're not going to work under the first vertical bar, we're going to go into the second vertical bar, and we're just going to do a slip stitch. So we're going to grab the yarn, but instead of keeping the loop on our hook, we're just going to bring it through the loop on our hook, so to create a slip stitch. And we're going to do that for 12 of these little vertical bars, okay? And don't forget the tiny ones, which are the purl stitches. So that's 1, okay, and then the next one, 2, and try and keep it loose, don't pull it too tight, 3, 11, and 12. Okay, so we have slip stitch in, we skip the first one, then we slip stitch in the next 12. Technically that's 13 stitches, but this loop on our hook here, which is our 12th stitch, is going to be the first of our 24. But I'm just confusing you. You don't need to worry about that too much. What we're going to do though is we're going to carry on the same honeycomb stitch pattern over the next 24 stitches. But like I said, this is our first one. So we need to count that as number 1. And then we just follow the same system. So this we can see as a nice long vertical bar. So we know that was a previous simple stitch. So we're going to bring the yarn down to do a purl stitch. Okay. And this will be stitch number 2. And then the next one we can see as a tiny little stitch. That's a purl stitch. So we do a normal simple stitch. And that's stitch number 3. Okay. So we're going to continue across till we get our 24 loops on our hook. And trust me, this will all add up in the end. 23 and last one, 24. Okay, so we just want to double check we have 24 loops on our hook. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. So we have a nice section in the middle that's roughly half of our stitch count. And all we're going to do now is we're going to work the same honeycomb stitch pattern, just repeating those 2 rows for the length up to, whoops, not the camera, up to the toes. So now we're going to be working this smaller piece of fabric from this point up to this point here, just kind of just beyond the toes. We don't have to, not right in front of the toes, so just leaving a little bit of toe space here. So we're going to work from here up to here. This short length, this will be our measurement number 3. So yeah, just repeat the honeycomb stitch up to the toes for this section. So I will do that and then I shall come back and show you what to do next. So we're going to stop here. We're going to leave these remaining stitches alone. And from this point, we're just going to do a normal reverse row. So don't forget your little chain 1 and then pull through 2 until you get back to the beginning. Okay. Okay, so I've repeated those 2 rows all the way up here. And like I said before, this is this length here, but it's just the top of the foot. So we're going to repeat it after we've worked on the toes. So the next bit we're going to work on now is this measurement here. And when you crochet this part here, you want to go, just like I said, kind of halfway on your little toe. So you don't want to stop right before the toes. So just give yourself a little bit of extra freedom and just go slightly over the toes. Especially if you've got really big toes, then you might want to just make it even a little bit longer. But we're going to work on the toes now, which is going to mean we're going to be doing some increasing and some decreasing, but we're going to start with some decreasing first. And what we're going to do is we're going to do 1 decrease this end and we're going to do 1 decrease this end, and your reverse rows are always the same, so you never need to worry about your reverse rows. Okay, so to do a decrease, what we're going to do is we're also going to work the knit stitch at the same time. So if you're brand new to the knit stitch, then I recommend checking out my Tunisian crochet playlist of different stitches. But again, we're going to skip that first vertical bar and we're going to go under the next vertical bar and the next vertical bar. So we're going to catch 2. Then what we want to do, because it's a knit stitch, we want to go to the back of our project. So we're going onto that second one and then we're going to the back. So there should be a gap behind there. We're going to go to the back and we're going to bring the yarn from the back underneath those, through the hole, and then underneath both of those 2 vertical bars. So that is a knit stitch and that's also a decrease, 1 decrease. Okay, then we're going to do normal knit stitches up to the last 2 vertical bars. So find your next vertical bar here, it's this little one. So we're going to go onto that. Okay, and then we're going to go through the gap behind and grab the yarn from behind, bring it through the hole and underneath that vertical bar. And that's a knit stitch. Okay, so we're going to knit stitch all the way up to the last 2 vertical bars. I always call them vertical bars. I'm sure they go. Maybe there's a professional Tunisian crochet name. I do not know. Please comment below what you call them. It's actually very interesting teaching Tunisian crochet. So coming up with these kind of strange terminologies I always do in my crochet teaching. But it's going to work one knit stitch under each vertical bar up to the last 2 vertical bars, the last 2 stitches. Okay, so we've just got 2 vertical bars left, and we're going to knit stitch those together. So basically, because we can't really go to the back of the fabric at the end, we're just going to go under the last 2 vertical bars like that, and then just grab the yarn. So it's kind of like, could be a simple stitch or a knit stitch really. Bring it under those 2 vertical bars. Okay, and now's the time to check your stitch count. It should have gone down by 2 loops, 2 stitches, and then we're just going to work a normal reverse row back to the beginning. Now, if you have exceptionally long toes, you might want to just do 1 decrease this end and then no decrease this end, but then after your reverse row and you do the next row, you don't do a decrease this end, you do a decrease this end. So you're like decreasing every other row instead of 2 on 1 row, so that will just make it a little bit longer, but hopefully this will work for you. So we just do a normal reverse row back to the beginning. Okay, so when we've done our reverse row, we're going to do the exact same thing again. We're going to do a decrease here and we're going to do a decrease here. And basically we want to keep doing that, keep doing our decreases until we end up with about 2 inches, maybe like 5 centimeters, about this sort of length in the middle. So we just keep decreasing until we get to just a short length, maybe 10, 12, 14 stitches. And I think I did 12 stitches. So again, we skip that first vertical bar, we go under the next one and under the next one as well to do a decrease, and then we go to the back because it's a knit stitch, bring the yarn through under both loops and then just keep it on our hook, and then we go to the next vertical bar. Be careful not to go under that second one on your decrease, so always make sure to get the next one. That's why I always recommend checking your stitch count at the end. So we work 1 knit stitch up to the last 2 again. Okay, so like before, when you get up to the last 2 loops, we're just going to put our hook through those last 2 loops, bring the yarn through both of them to do a decrease. So now I've decreased 4 times and I should have a stitch count of 20. And then we just work a normal reverse row. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep decreasing each end until we get down to, for me, 10 stitches. So about a couple of inches, 5 centimeters. But if you need a little bit of extra length, then like I said, just alternate your decreases every other row, evening it out. Okay, so I shall do that and then I shall come back. Okay, so I've now decreased down to 10 stitches and I got my first part of my toe piece, and then what we're going to do is the other side, so we need to get back up to our stitch count of 24. So we need to increase, and we're going to increase each end. So instead of decreasing, we're going to add a stitch, and to do that, this end we need to chain 1. Okay, chain 1, and we're going to work under that first vertical bar that we normally skip. So again, we're still doing the knit stitch. We're going to go under that first vertical bar and just work a normal knit stitch like so, and that's adding a stitch, so that's an increase. Then we're going to do 1 knit stitch to the end, so just normal knit stitches up to the end. Okay, but just before the very last vertical bar, we're going to yarn over. Okay, and that adds an increase this end, so we just yarn over and then we work through the last vertical bar as normal, bring the yarn through, And now when we count our stitch count, I should have gone up by 2. So I had 10 stitches before, so I should have 12. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Okay, so that's increasing either end. And then just like before, reverse rows are always the same. We do our little chain 1, then pull through 2. So we're going to do that for every row until we get back to our stitch count of 24, or however many stitches you have. So back to the beginning. So I'll just show you that again. To add an increase this end, we do a chain 1 and we work into that first vertical bar here. And it's a little bit loose and flimsy at first, but hopefully you can just work under that first vertical bar, and then it's normal knit stitches to the end up to the last vertical bar. So let's just zip across quickly. Then when we get to our last vertical bar, the very last one on the end. Now, one thing to point out is it can be easy to miss that increase there. It will look like sort of like those previous purl stitches, a little bit small. So make sure you don't miss it. Just grab it and then go to the back and make your knit stitch. Okay, and then before working for the last one, we yarn over again and we go under that last vertical bar. Okay, and again, just check your stitch count has gone up by 2. So I should have 14 stitches now. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Then we work a reverse row. So keep repeating those increases. Be careful not to miss the increase this end. Always check your stitch count until we get back to the same stitch count we had along here. So for me, that was 24 stitches. Okay, so I shall do that and then I shall come back. Okay, so I've done that. I've increased both ends. It's a little bit fiddly. It's quite loose when you're adding stitches here, and it's always easy to miss this one, but hopefully you've managed to master the increasing in Tunisian crochet. And now I'm back up to the same stitch count as I had here, which is 24. And what we're going to do now is we're going to do this part exactly the same again. So, and that's going to be underneath the foot. So if we come in for my terrible foot drawing, we've done our toe part, and we've also now done our underneath toe part, so decreasing and increasing. And now we're going to work this part again here, which is identical to this part. So what I like to do is I like to count how many little honeycombs I have from this point, and I know that I have 18 little honeycombs. So what I mean by that is these little diamonds here, I count 1, 2, 3, 4 up to the top, and I know how many I've got. I've got 18 here. So I'm just going to be able to repeat that for the other side, which is going to be the underneath of the foot. So I'm going to do that, keeping our same stitch count of 24 for me. And as always, I always start with a purl stitch. So again, just like we did before, super fiddly at the beginning, but we're going to bring the yarn down, go under. So we're not working under the front loop anymore. We're skipping that first loop, going into the second one like a normal Tunisian crochet, bringing the yarn down, holding it with our thumb, just bringing it under that loop for our purl stitch. And then our next, bring the yarn to the top, and our next one is going to be a normal simple stitch. So we're just back to our honeycomb pattern, and I'm going to repeat that until we have the exact same length as we had here from this point. Okay, so I shall do that. It'll take me a while, and then I shall come back. Okay, so we're going to purl one and then simple stitch one. Okay, so no more knit stitch. Okay, so I have finished Tunisian crocheting. The second part is exactly the same length as this part here, so you should have something that looks like this. So you've got this long piece, this is going to be the toes, This is going to be on the top of the foot, and then of course we have around the ankle and our cuff. So all that's left to do now, the idea is this will fold over and right along the toes, along here. So this should come up to this part here. But just before we sew everything together, we're going to make the heel. So this part here, I'm always getting the names of my parts of my foot wrong. So, but yeah, we're going to be making this part here, the heel, and to do that, it's exactly the same as the toe, but instead of decreasing each end, we're going to decrease on every other row. So let's begin, shall we? By decreasing on every other row, it's going to make it a little bit longer. So, and if you need to make it even longer, you could just decrease on every other row. So, but hopefully this will just work for you. So we're going to go back to the knit stitch, and we're going to start off with a decrease. So we're still going to skip the first loop here, the first vertical bar. I'm going to go under this second vertical bar and this little purl one here, but because it's a knit stitch, we're going to go to the back, grab the yarn, bring it under both loops, and keep that on your hook, obviously. And that's our first decrease, and that's the only decrease we're going to do on this row. So we're just going to work knit stitch all the way to the end now. So making sure to go into the next stitch. Just work one knit stitch all the way to the end. Okay, and when you get up to the end, we're just going to continue all the way to the ends and no decreasing this end for this row. Okay, so we've only decreased by one stitch. Then we work a normal reverse row. So do your chain one, then pull through two until you get back to the beginning. Okay, and then we do our next decrease row, but we're going to decrease at the other end. Okay, so we're back at the beginning. Okay, and then our next decrease row, we're just going to not do any decreases, and we're still going to skip that first vertical bar, but we're just going to work under just one vertical bar, the next one, work on knit stitch, and just work normal knit stitches, no decreases, all the way up to the last two vertical bars. Because we're going to do our decrease for this row, the other end. And the reason we do that is it keeps consistency with our decreases, so it decreases evenly rather than just decreasing on one side, and it will look lopsided otherwise. So let's just knit stitch up to the last two. And if you want to skip ahead, all you need to do is keep repeating these two decrease rows until you get down to 10 stitches like we did before. Basically the same length decrease as we did for the toes. Okay, but if you want to just watch me decrease at the end, then hang on. Okay, so when you get up to the last two vertical bars, we're doing our decrease this end. So we go under the next vertical bar and the very last vertical bar, and it's not really a knit stitch but you kind of go into the back and grab the yarn, bring it under both vertical bars, check your stitch count has gone down by 1, and you can see the knit stitch coming together, and then we just work on normal reverse row back to the beginning. So repeat this technique, alternating your decreases on every other row. One decrease at the beginning, one decrease at the end. So our next decrease row, we would decrease at this end. And repeat that until you get down to, like I said, 10 stitches or however many stitches you decreased on the toes. So a couple of inches long, 5 centimeters, something like that. And then, so I shall do that, and then I shall come back and we'll be doing the increases just like we did before. Back up to our stitch count. And I will show you how to do that. Okay, so back at the beginning, and now I would work the decrease here. So we skip the first vertical bar, go under the second and the third, go to the back because it's a knit stitch, and that's our decrease done. Then we just knit stitch to the end for this row. Okay, so I shall do that and then I shall come back. Okay, so I've repeated those decreases on every other row, and I've actually gone down to only 12 stitches, not 10. So it's a little 2 stitches longer because I think that's more than enough. I think that's what I did on the other sock. So what we've done now is, we bring back in my terrible drawing, is we've up to this point here, we've decreased. So it's going to look like this. And now we want to just finish up with this last part here to get back to our stitch count. What we're going to do is we are just going to do exactly the same as what we did here with our increases. I know it's not the most easiest part to do. Can be fiddly, but if you can bear with, we're just going to increase, but we're going to increase on every other row like we did with our decreases, so it will match the same length. So the first we're going to do, I'll quickly show you again how to do an increase. So we're going to increase this end to begin. So I'm going to chain one, and we're going to put our hook into that first vertical bar that we normally skip. And because it's a knit stitch, we're going to go to the back, like so. And as you can see, we've got 2 loops on our hook, so we've got our increase already done. Then we're just going to knit stitch all the way to the end, nice and normally. So we're not going to add any more increases. So just work knit stitches to the end, just coming up to the end, and just work on last vertical bar. So no increases this end, just this end. And then you just want to check your stitch count has gone up by 1. So I should have 13, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13. That's perfect, so I had 12 stitches. Then we just do a normal reverse row, like so, back to the beginning. Okay, back to the beginning. And for our next row, we're going to add an increase at this end. So not this end. So we're just going to work normally this end, which means skipping that first vertical bar. And the first vertical bar is always right next to our hook, so it's there. So this is going to be our second. Always looks like our first, but that's our second. So we skip the first vertical bar, no chaining, no increases. Work into that second vertical bar. Work your knit stitch, and we're going to work knit stitches up to the last stitch. Okay, just coming up to the end and second to last. So we're up to our very last vertical bar, and to add an increase at this end, if you remember, we just yarn over. Okay, so we yarn over and then work through that last vertical bar. Like so. There we go. And then we want to check our stitch count has gone up by 1. And then we work our normal reverse row back to the beginning. Okay, and then we're back at the beginning, and I'll just show you the next row again, because it's always a little bit hard to see this stitch here. So this time we're going to increase this end. So like we did before, we just do a chain 1 and we work into that first vertical bar here. Okay, so just chain 1 and work into that first vertical bar we normally skip, and we're adding a stitch there. Then we're going to work 1 knit stitch all the way to the end, so no more increases. But as we work, so I'm going to talk really slowly now as I try and crochet quickly up to the end. At least we don't have that many stitches to work with. But when you get to the end, because on the last row we did the increase this end, it's sometimes easy to miss that increase stitch because it kind of ends up looking like one of those purl stitches. It's very small. So there it is, hidden right next to the last vertical bar. So be really careful not to miss that little tiny stitch there. Sometimes it even goes a little bit horizontal. So probably should have mentioned that a little bit more around the toe part. But again, go to the back. Always feels a little bit weird and loose, but have faith, it all comes together in the end. Trust in the process. And then go for the last vertical bar, and there we go. Make sure you have a stitch count that's gone up by 1, and then work your reverse row. Okay, so we're going to continue increasing like this every other row at each end, alternating. until we get back to our stitch count of whatever this part was. So for me that was 24. And then all that's left to do is to cast off, as it were, as if we're knitting, and sew everything together into a sock. So I shall finish my increases and then I'll come back. Okay, so I have finished increasing and I'm back up to the same stitch count as along here. So all that's left to do is to fasten off, as it were, and we're going to slip stitch all the way across. So because we don't want to leave these vertical bars. So what I recommend is we go under the first vertical bar, grab the yarn like a simple stitch. But this time we're just going to pull that through the loop on our hook to do a slip stitch. I'm going to do that all the way across. So go on to the second one and slip stitch and so on all the way to the end. So just under the vertical bar, grab the yarn and then pull it through the loop on your hook. Okay. Okay, so just coming up to the end, and I actually have a increase stitch here, so that little one there, so I don't want to miss that one. So easy to miss that one. Okay, and then the very last vertical bar on the end, slip stitch into there. And now what we're going to do is we're going to cut our yarn, but we're going to leave, without knocking the camera, we're going to leave quite a long tail for sewing. Okay, and then all we need to do is just pull that through, and then that's it, that's secure. And then that leaves a really nice finish to your Tunisian crochet edge. So what we're going to do now is we are going to sew everything together. So you should have something that looks like this. We've got these two sort of bow shapes. This is going to be the heel, this is going to be underneath our foot. We've got the toe area, top of the foot, and then we have around the ankle. So the first thing to do is fold over your ankle pieces like this. Okay, it'll be a little bit curly here. You can block this if you prefer. The sewing together does kind of get rid of the curling, but it still does curl a little bit. So it's up to you if that's annoying. You can just block it. And I have done a video on blocking if you want to check that out. So we're going to sew these two sides together. Okay, so I'm just going to create a little knot here. I'm going to grab, so we're going to use that other tail end for sewing, but I'm just going to show this quickly up this end first. Grab our yarn needle. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to get one side. I'm going to come up from the bottom, and our little knot will catch on the inside. Okay, you can do a much neater job than me. Then we're going to get the other side, and we're going to come up roughly neatly as you can on the other side. Okay, so we're going to use a ladder stitch, and what that means, you've probably seen this before maybe on the internet somewhere, usually used in knitting or joining granny squares, but instead of going over from one side to the other like this, which can make it look quite messy, we want to kind of hide the yarn we're sewing with. So we're now this side at the bottom, and I'm going to go through the next stitch here, and I'm going to come up through the next stitch this side. Okay, and I'm going to pull that. Okay, you can immediately see that that's disappeared. Then instead of going back over to the other side, I'm going to go down a stitch this side, and then I'm going to come up the next stitch this side. And we're going to do, that's how we're going to sew the whole sock together. Like that. And then next one would be down a stitch this side, and then up to the other side, and so on and so forth. So we're always like a little ladder. You can see the stitches in between here, but when you pull, it just disappears and you get this really nice clean join, and you can't really see the yarn. So we go down a stitch, then we go over, then we go down a stitch and over. You won't always have nice neat stitches like here, so just work as neatly as you can sewing together. Okay, so I'm going to sew the ankle part together first, and then I shall come back and show you what to do next. Okay, so I've finished sewing the ankle part together. And I'm just going to then, what we're going to do next is we're going to fold this in half at the toe point. Okay, so just making sure your toe part is neatly, you can use stitch markers as well to work out where you've got this pattern change to match up with the pattern change on the other side. And another sort of method of the ladder stitch. It's basically the ladder stitch again, but if you're having problems with the stitches showing, what you can do is slightly different method is instead of going over, down, we can just go underneath. Instead of over the top of the stitch, we can go underneath the stitch like this, one side. Okay, and then find the other side. I don't have neat stitches here, so I'm just going to grab some yarn like this, but we're going to go underneath rather than over the top. I hope that makes sense. I'm afraid sewing is not my forte. My socks, when I sew them together, my crochet together is never great, so I'm probably not the best person, but hopefully this gives you some kind of ladder stitching sewing techniques. Ow. That can help. Okay, so continue like that, just grabbing a little bit each side underneath, and then maybe that will hide your stitches a little bit better. So once you give that a pull, hopefully it will disappear. But it's not great because I'm not great at sewing, but what you want to do is a better job than me. And like I said, you want to just now sew this edge and this edge together and these two long pieces together here, and then we're going to come back and do the heel parts, and then you want to fold the heel part in half and sew across there and across there, and then all that's left is this long piece here, which you then join as neatly as you can. You might want to use stitch markers along here. Okay, and then that should be all the sewing you need. So there, these along there, along here, these two together, down, and the toes, and then that is your finished sock. So I'm going to do all the sewing and then come back and show you the finished sock. Okay, so I have finished sewing both sides along here, and then you need to sew this little flap together, and then eventually the last bit is across here, joining it up with the ankle part. So it should look something like this with this extra flap where your heel is going to go. And there we go, that is our finished sock. So we can flatten it down this direction and hopefully that will be nice and comfortable. Honestly, my sewing is terrible, so don't look at my sewing. But hopefully that is comfortable, and there is your finished sock, which if you just repeat that pattern exactly the same for the other foot, you'll have a beautiful pair of crochet socks. So I need to kind of zoom out a bit. I wonder if I can zoom out as best I can and show a little bit more of the table. But there we go, you can see a little bit clearer the two socks, and there we go. And like I said here, if you want to block this a little bit to get rid of the curling, just blocking it in place will help, but hopefully that's not too annoying for you. But you can use any stitch for this design. You just follow the same format, do the long part, the cuff, the long part, and then divide your stitch count in half and do this bit, and then decrease, increase, and then repeat that, and then decrease, increase, and there you go. You have a beautiful sock pattern like so. You can see my sewing, I need to fix that tiny little hole. But there we go. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I hope you managed to follow along. I'm going to put the written version on my website. I'm also going to add some diagrams as well in case the sewing was a little bit confusing. So do check that out on my website. That'll come up in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. But I will see you soon for some more crochet and crafting fun. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.